Hello, welcome to Varn blog, and today we're going to be doing a Q&A for the public on a few things. One is why I thought it was very important to have a libertarian anti-war person that I didn't know personally. I don't know Scott Horton personally, but who I've followed for many, many years. Why I think it's important for people to understand their economic beliefs, even though we obviously don't sign on to them, and why I think there's a lot of elephants in the room we need to talk about the function and purpose of left media. So there's a whole lot involved in anti-imperialism, and in many ways, I'm going to say something somewhat controversial. The libertarian and conservative anti-imperialist often have less of a clear agenda when it comes to other nation states and can be slightly more honest about their agenda than the ones you see on the ostensible left, like the people around moderate radicals or the gray zone, etc. Because the libertarian interests are not aligned to any particular state and any particular state bourgeoisie. If anything, their flaw is an idealist view of the way markets work. And when they are more cynical actors, they don't tend to stay libertarians. So it's good to understand that particular aspect of why their reporting goes the way it does. But it's also important to notice that, like, Scott Horton admits, like, for them, spiting the war machine and anyone who might be associated with it is more important than any immediate other ideological considerations. So, they're fairly honest about that. So if Horton was celebrating the victory of Trump, not because he likes Trump, but because he hated Hillary Clinton. And I do think that was a real animus behind a lot of Trump support in the beginning. Personally, I can't prove that. That's an ascientific thing. I've never seen an opinion poll that totally justified that. But that is why a president who was never particularly popular was able to squeak by, not through the popular vote, admittedly. And where does that leave our politics now? For one thing, the political ideologies are largely siloed. I've had other ideologies on. There are people that I don't platform, all right? Particularly on culture issues, I just don't. Because I think, frankly, one, a lot of those debates are distractions, and two, in engaging in them, I'm going to hurt individuals. Whereas if I let someone state a political or economic ideology that I don't agree with, it's going to, well, Dusty, actually, Scott Horton talked about that. Scott said he actually did both. He pushed both an anti-war message and a pro-war message simultaneously. So Trump was always this demagogic cipher, right, that you could latch onto. And you see that in his policies. I mean, a lot of the Bannonite people really were committed anti-war paleo conservatives. They were. They were liquidated for people like Bolton. And then Bolton was liquidated and used as a scapegoat because Trump was always a cipher. That's why, in some ways, the 30% of people who really latched onto him have latched onto him so hard, because they're more using him as a figure of their anti-establishment feeling than any substantive political anything, because there's not a lot of substance there. It's something we have to deal with, though, because on the left, if we look at our own things, we've been absolutely asleep at the wheel, are playing ideological narratives as opposed to looking at class interest across the board. Like, well, ideological narratives are class interest. Not when you apply them to the left itself, they're not. So we have to ask ourselves, why someone whose economic politics we utterly disagree with, and it's actually, I'm going to say that, though, Austrian economics is more related to classical political economy than late neoclassical post-Keynesian economics. So there are some things in which, for good and ill, actually, um, that we have disagreed with people like MMTers on. Now, I actually agree with MMTers about the history of money, about the relationship of state to money. All right, I do. What I've disagreed about them is because of their some seeming naivete on class and their belief in basically class collaborationism down to the core, and they do, by the way. I mean, if you look at the MNT Humanities, this is our project. This is what all this community of care rhetoric is about. All right, it's a class collaborationist project. Now, if you want to look at what that's going on, and and we could make it more progressive, sure, in some ways we could, but what incentives do the government have to do that, given who actually pays for the politicians' campaigns, who maintains the tax base, who uses the military to maintain dollar stability, etc.? Not the people the left MMTers want to protect. Same with a lot of the left social democrats. And frankly, a lot of the sectarian non-electoral left, they've been used too. As I've said, that you should take a lot of the dark money flowing in those areas as an indication that someone sees them as an agent of chaos. I know that some of my allies over in the value form people will call me reactionary anti-capitalist for saying this, but I think that's ridiculous. Game theoretic it out. If you had progressive values, would you be giving money to the larger or the smaller sectarian campaign? But that, I mean, why would you pick the PSL or the Cloud Collective over, say, the DSA? Now, I'm still affiliated with the Emancipation Network, but that is a loose affiliation. We don't share money. We only share guest and planning resources in a couple of Discords. But I'm an independent actor now. Now, Varn Blog has always been independent. I've not been owned by Zero. That's some people thought that. I don't know why. I've not even been formally related to Zero. I'm not. Varn Blog is not formally related to TIR. Doug doesn't even sponsor my Patreon, although he sponsors Ben Burgess's. So whatever. But what do you mean by align? Do I align with the emancipation folks? So that depends on how you define it. Like, I'm politically pretty close to Kyle and June over at GIU. I'm not a Climonite, so that puts me and Tom O'Brien at some odds. And Esri and I are, frankly, Esri's even probably more politically skeptical than me. So I do align with the Emancipation Network, but we don't have a political line. There's no formal there's no formal thing that you agree to. We were a research project. So yeah. It's a whole nother thing. So I think it's important that we deal with some of these anti-imperialists on the right. I don't know that you have to form alliances with them. I don't think that generally works out. But on specific issues, particularly on geopolitics, you have to be willing to talk to and listen to anybody and filter the differences in your beliefs. The blanket friend-enemy distinction doesn't work if neither one of you have power. Because a friend-enemy distinction is about sovereignty of the state. You're not a sovereign. The maintenance of the state is not something you should be concerned with. Now, I can go into my other problems with that Carl Smithian logic, but that's what you have to look at. And I'm not going to silence someone on their difference in economic policies with me. I think you need to listen to it and understand why they think the way they do. And most people in my listeners aren't going to accept it, but you do need to understand a point of view. You cannot assume everyone is a bad faith actor because they're not on your tribe. Read Bomboric, who doesn't and yes, they're all sketch. You need to know how all this stuff developed. Right? You're not going to read an Austrian economist and agree with them or think that they believe in labor theory of value, because they don't. All right? But also, it's an objective fact, by the way, that marginal value theory and subjective theory of value was come up with by a socialist. And people push back with me on that over on Emancipation Network, but it's a historical fact. So which Austrian should you read? You should read the basic Austrians. I would actually read von Mises, and Hazlitt, and Bomboric, and the early people. Anything after Rothbard's going to be partisan, either towards libertarians or towards Republicans. But what I'm not saying is you should endorse their point of view. You also need to read neoclassical and Keynesian economics. Hayek is neo-Austrian. There's a lot of assumptions in Hayek that are more copacetic to neoclassical economics and more subjectivist. Like, he doesn't talk about praxology, for example. Now, if you don't have time for all that, that's fine, because I'm giving you guys infinite stuff to learn. No one can learn it all. It's not your job. But you should, when approaching different economic theories, particularly on the left, because right now, if you look at the Bernie Sanders campaign, for example, it was a weird hybrid of Keynesian liberalism, modern monetary theory, and classical social democracy. And believe it or not, Keynesian left Keynesianism and modern monetary theory, their differences are subtle, but they are different. And so Bernie's platform was based on several different kinds of economic advisement from different parts of left heterodox economic theory. Marxists have always sided with the heterodox economic theory in the academy because we've needed allies. In the academy, that's for the academic Marxist. But for you personally to understand things, that's not really the point. The one thing I will say is libertarians often have an interesting view of class where they talk about power elites and state class, but exempt capital business owners from class relations. They pretty much have a petty bourgeois view of the entirety of society. And that's, when they talk about the power elites, there we go. But we also, on the left, are not very good at being honest about class relations within our own movement. Like, who's sponsoring whom and why, what kinds of things. The PMC thesis, as has popped up in the last few years, was a very rough and not very well honed attempt at this. But the more I think about it, and the more I disagree, I disagree with it more and more. But I think the impulse is actually not incorrect, because we don't understand the divisions of the proletariat after the decline of the collective worker in industrial labor. Our models are all based off of that model. That economic model does not exist anymore, and it is declining even outside of the core of capital. All right. So understanding these, understanding what the non-friend thinks, I'm not going to say the enemy here, all right, is important. It's also important to know where we overlap, not just on foreign policy, and where we differ. All right. And the difference for us is partly what we see the role of government as, but that we have a class theory that doesn't exempt capital ownership. But that's declining. It does still exist, but it is declining rapidly. Automation is reducing it, but it won't reduce it to nothing. That's also why the third world revolutions haven't worked out the way we've wanted them to. For example, most of the gains of against poverty have been in China's whatever China is. I change on what I think it is by the day. This is a good question. You mentioned post-World War II, economically growing to having war-destroyed infrastructure. What's the explanation for the U.S. having highest GDP prior to 1900? Whoever is and this is also damning for the Soviets and the Chinese, by the way. Whoever is industrializing in the beginning stages will always have the highest GDP because it's going to have the highest initial growth rates because you're coming from nothing. And in the U.S., you can also explain it with that being paired with land grabs, which is the period you're talking about is when the consolidation of all the land grabs happened for between 1860 and 1910. That's EndNotes. What EndNotes Collective has been saying quietly, and I think they're wrong about lots of this. I think they're wrong about some of the history of the labor movement because they conflate different places and periods. It's literally I'm devoting a year of Mortal Science episodes to it. We're just having trouble editing them because we put so much into it. They think that Marxism is right, but also because of the collective worker mistake, that Marxism is wrong. Yeah, although I will also say when people bring up Mexico, Mexico is also a settled colonial state. Like that's an inter-imperialist war. And during the time period in which Mexico lost that, it was literally called the Empire of Mexico. It wasn't even a republic. This is not to justify it, all right? But bringing that up is what it's who really, honestly, it's two imperial powers fighting over indigenous land, which was taken 200 years prior by one imperial power and then taken by another back, or kind of. World systems theory does contribute to my understanding of imperialism and the wealth of the West. However, I think world systems theory takes nation states as sui generis actors, and that's a mistake. It also fails to look at core periphery relations within nations in most instantiations. That's not always true. There are some world systems theorists who do look at core periphery issues within a country, but most don't. EndNotes suggest we go back to dealing with affinity groups and quote non-movements to bring down capitalism, and that's why communization is necessary because the working class, the end of the collective worker, means that the conditions for communism have to come from somewhere else, and they won't even posit it as a Hegelian subject. And the way that the Marxists posit it. So they see it as something that you build prefiguratively by working through affinity groups. I point out, ironically, this is pretty much the same as what's a lot of the college Maoists came to in the 60s in the New Left. Sui generis means self-generating. So it's important that we talk to, and I might do more of these where we talk to people who agree with us on one thing and disagree with us on everything else. And I'm not going to censor what they say. I don't believe in that. I also don't believe in stuff like I don't believe in making political alliances in any formal way with these people, with a lot of these people, even though I wouldn't oppose them on specific issues. Right? I've been talked about a united front. I actually have that same stance, by the way, towards the DSA. I will support them on issues only. So this is not even me being inconsistent. Like I treat a lot of leftist formations and groups with the same skepticism, and let them talk and let them express their point of view. People can make their decisions about what people say. I think that you're all mature. Now, this leads me to some changes in Varn blog. But I only gave Horton an hour. I normally go for 2 or 3. But so here's some changes in the future. The popularity of the interview videos are just going down, and I don't really care about being super popular, but I don't want the low numbers on my interviews stopping me from getting guests. Because believe it or not, at this point, I'm actually getting higher download numbers from the podcast form of Varn blog on the interviews. My rants are doing okay, but the algorithm's actually, deprioritizing everything because of low numbers on the interviews. I might still make them available. I'm not sure yet, actually. But I'm going to do more small things in bite-sized chunks to at least get the views up, because people seem to like when I talk by myself. Interviews will be live for patrons. That'll remain. Unless it's somebody I promise that I'm only doing an audio interview with, and I do make those too. We have the No Royal Road series coming out, which is a collaboration with Patreon. No, it's just the last video here on the channel, and I will turn it into a podcast too. So there's a free podcast. There is the with the Regrettable Century people. There is the free podcast. There is the free podcast feed with also has a Regrettable Century collaboration called No Royal Road on it with Jason and Chris. I'm not bringing back Theorizing with a Hammer because it's not. It's was a creation of Zero Books, and I'm no longer affiliated with Zero Books. Plus, there are complications there. If you are a Zero Patreon, you already know. So I've had people ask me to revitalize the Theorizing with a Hammer format. I don't like doing series, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one question from the audience ahead of time, and one question from my patrons ahead of time, and I'm going to do a 15 to 30 minute explainer twice a month on those questions. So just me. You'll get an explainer, and I'll come up with a title for it. I'm also thinking about rebranding from Varn Vlog, because while I love the name, no one really knows what it's about because it's just my name. There is some benefit to that because I don't like being hemmed in by format. I don't even really totally consider this a left-wing platform solely. Like, yes, it's from a left perspective, and I say so in our disclaimer on the podcast. But it's not all that I do here. I do culture stuff or whatever. But the people have pointed out to me that, like, if you don't know who I am, you have no idea what this is about. And I'm probably less famous now than I was 5 years ago. So, as a pre-Chapo podcaster, the media sphere is very different. What I will keep is the music board. I don't know yet because I would have to have the initial intro done. redone by Jason, and I would need to pay him for that. And I am slightly less flush than I used to be. Not to make anyone feel bad. My patrons are doing great, and that's all I really want. Like I don't have a huge. My Patreon. What's interesting about this is while my YouTube is declining, my free podcast and my Patreons are both are both growing larger than you would expect from the YouTube numbers. So thank you guys for that. That's all you. Even if you're not a patron, you sharing this and doing this has helped. So I have low mass engagement, but intense engagement. The people who are interested tend to be really interested. So that's something to know. So those are the announcements. And so we're going to be doing a lot more mutual stuff. We are still affiliated with the Emancipation Network. We are not affiliated with Zero Books. And if you are Zero Books, a Patreon subscriber, you know that had already happened, but there's other stuff that's happening. There's complications to me doing any left books for the near future for reasons that I can't discuss. Because yeah, it'll become apparent pretty soon. But I want to do more educational stuff. So also if you guys want me to answer philosophy questions or, within my sphere of expertise, it wasn't shut down by John Hunt. It was sold. So you'll see a lot of changes in the left media sphere. Well, okay, on Spinoza and delusions, those actually aren't my expertise. I'd actually have to find someone to help you on that. So I'll answer what I can answer authoritatively. My specialties are like Marx, somewhat Hegel, Kant, modern communization theory, etc. So yeah. Also, so I promised to talk about this, and I haven't. But I was going to talk about this on the final episode of Pop the Left. That won't happen under that name. So yeah, I know Nietzsche. I know Nietzsche as well as I know Marx. I've probably actually read more Nietzsche than Marx, and I've read a lot of Marx. So my passion for German philosophy came from studying Nietzsche. I'm one of those guys. I also think I have a critique of pure reason in German somewhere, just for cred reasons. So there's stuff that I can't talk about because it's still being settled, but just so you guys know, like there will be there's unlikely to be a final episode of Pop the Left, like we promised, and it's not Doug Lane's fault, and it's not because I'm not willing to do it. It's because the actions over at Zero, and I'm not at liberty to talk about them, but like I said, the Patreons at Zero already know. I don't think so. I actually think Nietzsche is very, very useful to understand reactionary thought in general, and not just the right. I don't think Nietzsche would have thought himself as a right-wing actor, and I think Lacerda's book on him is bad. So, but I also think I think if you don't understand Nietzsche, you don't understand all the weird French existential stuff. And Marxism, and also like you need to understand Nietzsche because Nietzsche was actually influential on Mao, which I can get into if you want me to. But Mao was exposed to Nietzsche before he was exposed to any Marxist. It was Nietzsche, Kropotkin, then Marxism, starting with Stalinism and going all the way back. Doug is not at liberty to speak about this stuff right now. Doug is not also banned from my platforms, but he would be coming on as a guest. We are not formally affiliated in any way, form or fashion. When Doug tells me what he wants to be done as far as the future of his work, I will definitely promote it. However, whatever differences we have, they do not extend to me not promoting his personal work. He's a friend, and I'm going to stand by him because I think things are about to kind of be hard for him. But all that said, Pop the Left is no longer a viable project. Doug and Derek will be working together only in independent means. We will not be part of the same organization. And I have no ill will towards Doug Lane. None. I disagree with him on many, many things, but he knows that. But I'm really not at liberty to go into a whole lot more. What was said on Doug's Patreon feed is all I really know too. And that's all I'm really at liberty to talk about. I haven't been formally affiliated with Zero for over a month. I drew my last contractor's paycheck from Zero a while back. Oh yeah, I'm not gonna talk about a friend, but if you guys believe in anything that Doug does, even if you disagree with part of it, I'm just gonna say like he might need to support. But politically, Doug and I have gone in slightly different directions. I'm more interested in foreign policy. I thought the turn towards cultural debates was a waste of time, and I've always thought that. If someone who is a Zero patron, please inform the individual there about what was announced in the Zero patron, because it hasn't been publicly announced, and I'm not at liberty to like fully go into it. Once things are formally announced, I will actually announce some things, and I might even have Doug on to talk about it. But what I'm going to be leaning into on Varn Blog is foreign policy, pure philosophy, education, and culture stuff, but not cultural controversies. More stuff that you enjoy and understand and want to know. That's long. Lacerdo is a black and white thinker because he's a Stalinist. And I use that like there's a reason why no one will touch a Stalin book, by the way. It apparently has more errors than pages, according to one reviewer. I actually like Lacerdo's book on liberalism, but it wasn't particularly nuanced. It was just in general a more or less correct response in some ways to parts of the liberal project. I think Lacerdo is right about Nietzsche and Nietzsche's reactionary nature. I just don't know that that's all that's there. Well, what part of the culture war? Because guys, if you want to talk about economics, like even the $24 million that they paid Dave Chappelle and the $18 million that they probably made off of him in the first few days, is nothing on the political economic scale. It's not much. It's a drop in a bucket. When you look at budgets, they're in trillions now. Those are orders of magnitude bigger. And so when you're chasing around culture war stuff, you're only dealing with one aspect of the economy. Yes, that aspect of the economy actually survives off the culture war, because it is a clear marketing opportunity for both politics and marketers. But you'll find the same capitalists playing both sides of the game. So in a superficial sense, yes, they're right. But in a broader sense, if you focus on that, all you're going to be talking about is whatever like a bunch of suits want you to talk about. Like right now, right? We had this big row over Chappelle, and I'm not saying that people's grievances on Chappelle are unfounded. I'm not saying they're unimportant. I'm not saying that also we shouldn't look at the complications of that specific situation, but we've been talking about that more than we have been the strikes that are going on, and we're living in the middle of a strike wave. I mean, what is the irony of the title of Ben Burgess's book? Is we've been arguing about canceling comedians while the world burns. Parts of culture are downstream from economics, and parts of culture aren't. Relations of production are part of culture. They're not downstream from economics. They're foundational, but other parts are downstream. I'd say it's a good history check. Just know the Leftists bias. I have read it. I do own it. I don't hate it, but I don't think it's completely fair. I do think it goes into, like, I do think it corrects some of the overcorrection in the other direction, by Walter Kaufman, who just made Nietzsche out to be some kind of proto-liberal. Probably, yeah. I wish he would stop. The culture war is a cheap way to gin up people's interest really fast, because it's something you can care a lot about and it seems to affect your life, but you have almost no control of it, and commentary on it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I would read Leftists' book for the primary sources, but then I'd also read against it. So, to recap, we're going to be exploring diverse views. I'm not going to edit them. I'm not sure if I'm going to continue putting a whole lot of I'm agreeing with this. This is a good thing to read. Raymond Williams is a good theoretical on this essay on this idea. In his essay, the means of communication as a means of production. I think that's probably even more useful than Frankfurt School stuff on this. The edgy hype cancel culture cycle is fine tuned. Everybody can comment based on the affinity apathy. Yeah, and they can also use it to shut people up, even if they're not trying to cancel anyone. I mean, one of the ironies of cancel culture is both sides can use it to silence people. I have not read it. I'll look it up. I would say this. I would say that in some ways this has to be undeniable. The American tax system is based partially on the transatlantic slave trade, but I would be skeptical that it is causal. Highly skeptical. So, but I need to read exactly what is said before I comment on that. Have you ever read anything from Robert Mizer's work on financial options contracts and asset price models? And the answer to that is I have skimmed one thing and can't speak on it authoritatively, so I'm not going to. I'm familiar that it exists. I have kind of looked up to it because I'm interested in that, but I haven't gone into a whole lot of it. If the Greek democracy required immediate prior lawgiver authoritarians to cancel debts, reorder things, should we oppose such a figure? If you look at what happens with Roman republics, my answer is probably. Honestly, this is a theory that Joseph Tainer talks about in the Decline and Fall of Complex Civilizations, that usually when things get overcomplicated, there is a turn towards an authoritarian power to simplify things, but that causes its own sets of complications almost instantly through theoretical ripples, and usually the society just collapses. Although it can form into a different kind of society. That's what happened with the Roman Empire. I think so. I do think so, actually. It is now. Claiming you're canceled is definitely a marketing ploy now. Okay, so this is on the thing about Eisenhower. The not casual that shows how debates about slavery debate was put side by side, but obfuscating, focusing on early tax debate. Okay, yeah, I need to read that because I suspect that's accurate. From other stuff I know. I think so. I think I remember talking to him about learning from talking to Robert Mizers. Any more ideas on China-U.S. obsession with zero-sum research grabbing mindsets? It's not really a zero-sum research grabbing mindset. It's about maintaining cultural hegemony and access to market and resources. And to frame that in zero sums keep people motivated to do so. In some sense, I think it's inevitable. But that's because, like, okay, an interesting thing to think about, for example, like the Hobbesian description of people is totally not true because we're not solitary beings like that. But between states, it totally is. And there is an incentive for states to act like things are zero sum, even when they're not, to keep their populations motivated and invested. So yeah. So I'm gonna wrap this up because it's my birthday. I should be spending it all on this, and plus I have some other work to do. Here's to turning 41, and here's to the end of an era and the beginning of another one. Are there any examples that you know about where workers in the same supply from different companies coordinate strikes together? Yeah, there was actually one with Mexican solidarity strikes with American workers on the assembly line 2 years ago. It happens all the time. I have a question. Is there a Marxist theorist that focuses on how slavery in America relates to value theory? Because it confused me how the slave work was played into value. There are actually, but it's complicated because Marx doesn't seem like, I'm not saying he's inconsistent on that, but Marx like talks about slave society as being prior to capitalism, but always also talks about capitalism being dependent on it. So its exact relationship to value is wrong. It's not wrong. Excuse me. It's not clear. Let me rephrase that. It's not clear. I actually don't know what Marx is wrong on that. What I would say also is that there are many people who were slavers who did not see themselves as part of capitalism. That was part of their appeal. But I'm going to go look that up because I know there's people writing on it. Actually, the new history of slavery people are part of it. I just don't know what the Marxist critique was. I know the classic Marxist answer to that is slaves were treated as living fixed capital, which would mean like they were being treated economically like machines, but particularly inefficient machines because you have to keep them alive as people. But useful for direct extraction, right? Which is a horrible way to talk about people. I'm not going to lie, but it is like economics is usually going to lead you to have to look at the horrible things about the way people use each other. So yeah, but I don't know that that holds up. The New History of Slavery people really pushed back on that, and back on the idea that it was that chattel slavery in particular was a separate mode of production. Plus, like people like uh, Chris Wickham and uh, Jairus Banerjee have pushed back on the idea that like prior slave societies were truly only slave modes of production too. So it's it's hard when you look at the Marxist schemas on slave societies, turning the feudalism, and look at what he says on the U.S. Civil War. They don't seem immediately copacetic, and so I need to go back and look through Marxist letters on the Civil War. I'm not drinking tonight. But as far as Utah stuff, I like ketos. But yeah. Here it is. John Clegg. John Clegg has the best critique of the New History of Capitalism school while also advocating for the U.S. slavery as capitalist within the Brennerite framework. Thank you, PH. I knew one of you were going to have it for me. This is why I have a great community, because I can't know everything. All right. With that, I'm going to actually keep my promise and go. Have a great day. And as soon as I can talk more about what's going on with Zero, and as soon as I know more, honestly, I'll, I'll tell you out. Follow if you find out, you tell me. Because I'm rooting for my friend to come out slightly unscathed. All right, take care.